5 years ago, my biggest weakness cost me my dream job. Today, that same fatal flaw helped me build $1 million business. I know that sounds impossible, but here's what nobody tells you about weaknesses. They're not flaws to be fixed, they're superpowers, waiting to be unleashed. And in the next 30 minutes, I'm going to share the exact 3-step framework that made this transformation possible. This isn't positive thinking fluff or motivational nonsense. This is a psychology-backed system that I've used personally and taught to hundreds of others. By the end of this video, you'll understand why everything you've been told about overcoming weaknesses is completely wrong, and, more importantly, you'll have a concrete roadmap to turn your biggest limitation into your greatest competitive advantage. Here's what we're going to cover today. First, I'll show you why traditional fix your weaknesses advice is not just ineffective, it's actually harmful. Then, I'll walk you through the 3-step psychological framework that changes everything: reframing, environment, design, and systematic application. I'll share 3 real case studies, including my complete transformation story, and give you the exact tools I use with my clients who've generated millions using this approach. But let me start with a story that changed everything for me. 3 years into my corporate career, I was up for a promotion I'd been working toward for months. The role required someone who could make quick decisions under pressure. During the final interview, they presented me with a scenario requiring an immediate choice. Instead of giving a quick answer, I did what I always do. I analyzed every possible angle, considered all the variables, asked clarifying questions. 20 minutes later, they stopped me mid-sentence. "We need someone who can think on their feet," they said. "Your overthinking is a problem." I didn't get the job. For weeks, I beat myself up about my fatal flaw, my tendency to overanalyze everything. I tried to change, to become more spontaneous, to think less. It was exhausting, and it didn't work. That's when I stumbled upon research that completely shifted my perspective. What if my overthinking wasn't a weakness at all? What if it was just a strength in the wrong environment? This brings me to the first major breakthrough you need to understand. There's a fundamental difference between weaknesses and traits, and this distinction will change how you see yourself forever. Neuroscience research shows us that when we label something as a weakness, our brains literally process it as a threat. This triggers our fight-or-flight response, which consumes massive amounts of mental energy. Every time you try to fix a weakness, you're essentially fighting against your own neural wiring. But here's what's fascinating. The exact same trait that gets labeled as a weakness in one context becomes a superpower in another. Let me give you some examples that will blow your mind. Steve Jobs was notoriously stubborn and impossible to work with. His colleagues called him tyrannical and obsessive, but that same weakness drove him to create products with unprecedented attention to detail. His stubbornness wasn't a flaw, it was perfectionism in action. Oprah Winfrey was considered too emotional early in her career. News directors told her she was unprofessional because she couldn't maintain journalistic distance. But that emotional intensity became her greatest asset, allowing her to connect with guests and audiences in ways that changed television forever. Elon Musk's compulsive behavior and inability to let things go, traits that have strained his personal relationships, are the same traits that drive him to achieve what others consider impossible. The pattern is clear. What we call weaknesses are often just strengths, expressing themselves in the wrong environment or being measured by the wrong standards. This is why traditional advice about overcoming weaknesses fails so spectacularly. You can't overcome what you are, you can only optimize it. Now let me share the 3-step framework that transforms this insight into practical results. This system has helped my clients generate over $10 million in combined revenue by leveraging what they previously considered their biggest limitations. Step 1 is reframing, and this is where most people get stuck. Reframing isn't just changing your words, it's rewiring your brain's automatic responses. Cognitive behavioral therapy teaches us that language shapes reality. When you call something a weakness, you're programming your subconscious to avoid it, hide it, or fight against it. But when you reframe that same trait as an underdeveloped superpower, everything changes. Here's the specific process I use. First, write down what you consider your biggest weakness. Be brutally honest. Then, list 10 different ways to describe that same trait in positive terms. For example, if you wrote "I'm too sensitive," your list might include highly empathetic, emotionally intelligent, intuitive, able to read people well, deeply, caring, and so on. This isn't just wordplay, you're literally creating new neural pathways. Next, identify 3 successful people who share this trait. Research their stories and notice how their weakness became their strength. This gives your brain evidence that transformation is possible. Finally, start using your new language consistently. Instead of saying "I overthink everything," I started saying "I have exceptional analytical abilities." The shift was immediate and profound. Let me tell you exactly how this worked for me. My overthinking problem became strategic thinking expertise. Instead of seeing my analysis paralysis as a weakness, I recognized it as a superpower that needed the right environment to shine. This single shift in perspective opened up possibilities I'd never considered. Step 2 is environment design, and this is where the magic really happens. Your environment determines whether your trait shows up as a strength or a weakness. The same person who seems indecisive in a fast-paced startup might be invaluable as a risk analyst at an investment firm. The key is understanding what environments amplify your natural abilities. Environmental psychology shows us that context is everything. A trait that makes you struggle in one setting can make you dominate in another. The goal isn't to change yourself, it's to find or create environments where your natural wiring becomes an advantage. Here's my systematic approach to environment design. First, identify the conditions where your trait has served you well. When has your weakness actually been helpful? What was different about those situations? For me, I realized my analytical nature was an asset when I had time to research, when the stakes were high, and when thoroughness mattered more than speed. Second, actively seek out or create these favorable environments. This might mean changing jobs, starting a business, or simply restructuring how you approach tasks. I left corporate consulting and started my own research-intensive business where my deep analysis was valued, not criticized. Third, modify unfavorable environments when possible. If you can't change your environment completely, look for ways to adapt it. Negotiate for more preparation time, create systems that support your natural working style, or find partners whose strengths complement yours. Step 3 is systematic application, and this is where most people drop the ball. Having insights isn't enough, you need to systematically rewire your automatic responses and build new habits around your reframed strength. The neuroscience of habit formation tells us that lasting change requires consistent repetition over time. You need to practice seeing and using your trait as a strength until it becomes automatic. This typically takes between 21 and 66 days, depending on the complexity of the behavior. Here's the specific system I developed. Every morning, I spend 5 minutes writing about how I'll use my superpower that day. This primes my brain to look for opportunities rather than threats. Throughout the day, I catch myself using my analytical abilities effectively and acknowledge it. Before bed, I review what went well and how my trait contributed to positive outcomes. I also created external accountability by sharing my reframe with trusted friends and asking them to point out when they see my strength in action. This external validation helps reinforce the new neural pathways you're building. The measurement piece is crucial too. you need concrete evidence that your transformation is working. Track specific metrics like decision quality, project outcomes, and client feedback. When you can see measurable improvements, your brain starts believing the new story you're telling about yourself. Now, let me share 3 real case studies that show this framework in action. First, my complete transformation story. After losing that promotion, I spent 6 months trying to become more decisive. It was miserable and ineffective. Then, I discovered this framework, and everything changed. I reframed my overthinking as strategic analysis expertise. Instead of fighting my nature, I started looking for environments where thoroughness was valued over speed. I launched a consulting business focused on helping companies make complex strategic decisions, exactly the kind of work where my analytical nature was an asset, not a liability. Within 18 months, I had built a 6-figure business. By year 3, I had crossed the $1 million mark. The same trait that cost me a corporate promotion became the foundation of my entrepreneurial success. My clients pay premium rates precisely because I don't make quick decisions. I make thoroughly researched, strategically sound ones. Here's another powerful example from one of my clients, Sarah. She came to me convinced that her introversion was holding back her career. In meetings, she rarely spoke up. Her manager had told her she needed to be more assertive and outgoing to advance. Using the reframing process, Sarah recognized that her introversion came with deep listening skills and the ability to process complex information before responding. Instead of trying to become an extrovert, she started positioning herself as the strategic thinker who provided crucial insights after careful consideration. She negotiated with her manager to receive meeting agendas in advance, giving her time to prepare thoughtful contributions. She started writing detailed follow-up emails that synthesized key points and suggested next steps. Within 6 months, she was promoted to a senior analyst role, where her reflective approach was exactly what the team needed. The transformation wasn't about changing who she was, it was about finding the right context for her natural abilities to shine. Sarah's quiet nature, which seemed like a weakness in brainstorming sessions, became a superpower in strategic planning. But let me also share a case where the framework didn't work, because understanding failure is just as important as celebrating success. Mark came to me, struggling with what he called his perfectionist problem. He spent so much time perfecting projects that he consistently missed deadlines, frustrating his team and clients. Mark intellectually understood the reframing concept, but he never fully committed to the environment design phase. Instead of finding or creating situations where his perfectionism was valued, he kept trying to apply it in fast-paced, deadline-driven environments, where it would always be seen as a weakness. The lesson here is that reframing alone isn't enough. You must be willing to make real changes to your environment and approach. Mark wanted to keep his perfectionist tendencies, but also wanted to succeed in environments that fundamentally conflicted with those tendencies. The framework works, but only when you apply all 3 steps consistently. This brings me to the practical tools I want to share with you. I've created a weakness assessment questionnaire that helps you identify your core traits and their potential positive expressions. There's also a transformation tracking spreadsheet that guides you through the 21-day reframing process, and an environment design template that helps you systematically evaluate and optimize your surroundings. All of these tools are available for free. I'll put the links in the description below. I've also compiled a reading list of the key psychology and neuroscience research that backs up this framework. If you want to dive deeper into the science, these resources will give you a solid foundation. For those ready to take this work to the next level, I'm launching an intensive 8-week program where we'll work together to identify and transform your biggest limitation into your greatest competitive advantage. But honestly, you can get tremendous results just by applying what I've shared today consistently. Let me address some common questions I get about this framework. First, what if my weakness is really severe? The framework still applies, but the timeline might be longer and you might need additional support. For example, if you're dealing with clinical anxiety or depression, work with a mental health professional alongside applying these concepts. Second, does this work for all types of weaknesses? In my experience, it works for personality traits and behavioral patterns, but not for skill deficits. If you don't know how to code, reframing won't teach you programming. But if you think you're bad with people because you're introverted, that's absolutely something this framework can address. Third, how long does transformation take? Most people see initial shifts within the first week of consistent reframing practice. Significant behavioral changes typically happen within 30 to 60 days. But remember, this is about optimizing who you already are, not becoming someone completely different. Fourth, how do I handle negative feedback from others? This is crucial. Not everyone will understand or support your transformation. Some people are invested in seeing you as limited. Set boundaries, seek out supportive communities, and remember that their resistance often reflects their own fears about change. Finally, what if I try this and it doesn't work? Failure usually comes from incomplete application. Most people do the reframing, but skip the environment design. Others change their environment, but don't systematically practice the new behaviors. The framework works when you commit to all 3 steps consistently. Let me summarize the key insights that can change your life starting today. Your weaknesses aren't character defects that need to be eliminated. They're natural traits that need the right context to become strengths. The 3-step framework, reframing, environment, design, and systematic application gives you a concrete path to make this transformation. The most important realization is this: you don't need to become someone different to be successful. You need to become more fully yourself in the right environment. Your so-called fatal flaw might be the very thing that sets you apart from everyone else. I want to challenge you to take action right now. In the comments below, share what you've always considered your biggest weakness. Don't worry about judgment. This community is here to support each other. I want you to practice reframing by also sharing one possible, positive way to describe that same trait. For example, you might write, "I've always thought I was too stubborn, but maybe I'm actually persistent and committed to my values. I personally read and respond to every thoughtful comment, and I'll help you brainstorm positive reframes for your trait." If you found value in this video, please hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Next week, I'm sharing the psychology-backed techniques I use to maintain confidence while building new habits, and you won't want to miss that. Give this video a thumbs up if it's changed how you think about your limitations, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. We all know someone who's being held back by a weakness that could actually be their greatest strength. Remember, your biggest weakness might just be your biggest superpower in disguise. The question isn't whether you can change, it's whether you're ready to see yourself clearly and create the conditions for your natural abilities to shine. I'll see you next week, and until then, start seeing your flaws as features, waiting for the right context to emerge.